Well, hey everybody, welcome in. Today we are going to be talking about pixel art. And even if you know nothing about pixel art right now, even if you know nothing about traditional art, by the end of this course, you're going to be able to make some really cool stuff and be well on your way to creating art for your own games or your own icons or stickers or whatever you want to do with pixel art. So here are a few of my somewhat recent projects, just to show you the kind of things that we can do with pixel art. We have some sideways art here. This is a little bit more detailed, a little bit more higher res pixel art. It's a little ice cream shop and the little shack and everything. This was a concept for a game about a little girl that has a pet bear. Really fun project, lots of little details here. I love that. Down in the lower left, we have some art from that same game. I did some art for a retro version of Halo. So here's a ghost and a little splash screen. Here's some animation for an enemy for kind of a top-down adventure game. Then we have some lower res stuff. We have a little GameCube here. We have a little Halo warthog, and I've gotten into creating desks with computers on them and stuff, and bookshelves, and I love making furniture and that kind of thing. And these are great projects to start out with. We'll probably do a couple of these kind of things here. Here's a top-down view of a spaceship. We'll also be working on something like this in an upcoming course. And then, of course, my favorite, boba. So this is the kind of pixel art I know how to do. And I'm going to teach you some of the concepts and things that I've learned over a few years of really learning how to do this. And just so you know, I'm not like a super good traditional artist or anything like that. I actually really like pixel art because you can be a little bit more exact and you don't have to have, great brush skills or anything like that. You can place every pixel where it's supposed to go. And it's just a way you can be a little bit more exact with your art, and it ends up coming together really, really nicely. So if this all sounds good for you, let's jump into the course. For this course, we're going to be using an app called Sprite. Sprite is what I would probably call like the standard for pixel art programs. It's kind of like Photoshop, but it's built specifically for pixel art. And if you're going to get into pixel art at all, I would highly recommend picking up Sprite. You can get a trial version and you can play around, and it doesn't have any limits except for you can't save files. So, I mean, you can get the trial version and play around and even follow along here. But if you want to buy it, it's $20. There's actually a sale right now when I'm recording this for $10, which is a smoking deal. Definitely would recommend getting Sprite. This is the best, easiest way to make pixel art. There are also some free tools out there. You can Google those, but Sprite I think is really just the king of pixel art, and I really recommend getting that. So once you have Sprite, there are a few different parts of the interface. There's the main canvas here in the middle. There's a little preview window down below, which is going to be really convenient because we can get really detailed here in the middle, and we can see what this looks like zoomed out down here in this view. We have our layers over here on the right. We have some tools over here on the right, and to the left we have our color palette and our color picker. That's really about it. One thing to mention is that if you go up to Edit, to Preferences, you can do all kinds of stuff with the theme. You can break the windows up and move them around if you want to. You can change the theme from dark to light. In fact, I might change mine to dark because I do like that. You can change the screen scaling and the UI element scaling, and those will kind of update your button resolution and all of that stuff. So I think I might make mine dark for now because I do like a darker interface in general. I'll go ahead and hit apply and OK. And there are a lot of other little things that we can get into with the interface, but I want to get making some cool stuff. So we're not going to spend a ton of time on that. First thing I'll do is go up here to our selection mode and hit our rectangular marquee. You can also hit M, and I'll just select all of this and then hit backspace on the keyboard to give us a blank canvas, and we're ready to work. All right, one of the biggest kind of first questions that you might have about pixel art is, how big of a canvas do I make? How big should I make pixel art? What's the right resolution? Well, that answer, unfortunately, is it depends. Right now, I'm working on a 16 by 16 sprite. So if I go to my pencil tool, I could also hit B. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 pixels across, and 16 pixels up and down. I think this is a great canvas size to start with as you're learning pixel art because it's not too big, not too small, gives you a little bit of room to work. When you're making a new sprite, you can go to File, New, and it will ask you how big you want to make it. By default, it will be your clipboard size, but I would start with 16, tab 16 like that, RGBA, transparent, and hit OK. And we can zoom in here and we have our 16 by 16 sprite. Another thing we'll do to get our colors, just so that we're all using the same colors, is go up to the upper left-hand corner here, and there's this little page button. It's called Presets. Click that, and let's go down to this palette ARNE16 like that, and hit load, and then click off of this so that we have 16 different colors here. This is just so we can all use the same colors. Of course, you can use whatever colors you want, but this will make it a little easier to follow along. So as far as sizing goes, if we go back to our examples here, now a lot of these look pretty detailed as far as pixel art goes, okay? If I were to zoom in here, of course this is JPEG'd, so you can't see all the details necessarily, but if you zoom in, there are a lot of pixels here, right? This whole building is probably, 8, 16, 32, 64, this might be 80 or 90 pixels high, which for pixel art is pretty high resolution. There's quite a bit of detail here, and it's going to be tempting to jump into making stuff like this as soon as possible. I would really recommend staying very low resolution until you learn the basics. So, for instance, this kind of stuff. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So this is a 16 by 16 sprite, and look, we can see it. We know what it is. Isn't that cool? This here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So this is like a 32 by 32 sprite, right? So you can get pretty detailed and have a lot of fun even in a 32 by 32 sprite. This one's probably 128 by 128, or maybe 64 by 64. This one looks like maybe 32. So the resolution that you're going to choose for pixel art is going to depend on one of two things. One, and the easiest one, is do you have any limitations? Are you designing for a game that uses 8 by 8 sprites or 16 by 16 sprites or something like that? If so, then you kind of have to work with those. If not, and you're just drawing art to draw art just for fun, then you can kind of make it whatever resolution you want. But the resolution is going to depend on how much detail you want to add. Because even just in this Halo example, we have our Halo Warthog, and we can see that it's a Halo Warthog. We can recognize that. But there's not actually that much detail here. We have the main basic shapes and everything, the main colors, but you don't see all of the buttons and details and everything. It's just generally the shape and size and color of a Halo Warthog. Whereas something like this, a Ghost, this has all the little lines and all kinds of stuff, all the little things that you would expect, and this is a much higher resolution image. And so part of this is going to depend on how much detail do you want to add? How much work do you want to do, basically? In fact, for this game, these sprites are huge as far as like a retro style game, because I actually ended up cutting this down quite a bit because it's just a lot of work to create all of the animated assets and everything for each of these things. I mean, it's just pretty big pixel art if you're trying to make a game, quickly by yourself, right? Same thing for this. I mean, this looks beautiful. We have lighting and all that stuff, but it's relatively high resolution and there's a lot of little details there. So how crazy do you want to get? Whereas something like this, you can tell what it is, and there's some detail here, but we don't see all of the wood grain or anything like that, but we still get it. And that's actually going to bring us to our first major concept, which we're going to talk about in the next video. In this video, we're going to talk about one of my favorite concepts about pixel art. This is kind of where the magic of pixel art comes in. And that is that pixel art is expressive, not exact. So what do I mean by that? So here we have a picture of a Game Boy Color. And there are actually quite a bit of details here just on this Game Boy. There's the main shell, there's the speaker, there's the start and select buttons, A and B buttons, the D-pad, the Nintendo logo. Then we have kind of the bezel around the screen and the screen itself and the Game Boy Color logo and the power button and the little ridges on the sides. There's all this stuff, which if we were making a pixel art Game Boy, the only way to get all of this detail would be to make pixel art that's just about the same resolution as this photo. But pixel art is expressive, which means that we want to capture the feeling of this without having to draw in all of the detail. So check this out. I'm going to move this over here like this, and I'm going to make a new canvas, 128 by 128, just so we have some room to play around. I'll actually make one more color here, and I'll actually mix one more color. I'll take this little slider thing here, and I'll move this to the right to add another color to my palette, and I'll select that. Let's make this teal. Let's zoom in here, and I'm going to go over to our rectangle tool, or you can hit U, and let's draw a rectangle, and I'm going to make this pretty big. Again, this is on 128 by 128 canvas, and I'm going to kind of eyeball the dimensions here. I can hit G to switch to Paint Bucket, this fill tool. And now we can start drawing in all of the details. So probably the biggest thing would be this kind of blackish screen. Let's just use this color here and grab our rectangle. And I'm just gonna, again, kind of eyeball this. It's okay, we can change this later if we don't get it right. And we'll do kind of something like that. Hit G, put that in. And we're just gonna kind of mock up all of the different details here. Let's grab something a little bit lighter. Let's maybe grab this gray and grab a rectangle. And let's do something like this. We're just going to make a plus. There we go. Just fill that in. So now we have our plus. I can go over to our rectangle tool and hold this down. I can switch over to a filled circle. And let's use kind of the dark blue for this one too. And we're going to have a circle here and a circle here. And we'll fill in a couple of buttons. I'm just drawing those in. Then we would need our Game Boy screen. So let's make a color that's sort of that color. I'll switch over to a filled rectangle this time. Let's put that in, yeah, something like that. So I can hold down Alt anywhere to turn to eyedropper a color, which is a little bit quicker than going up to my palette sometimes. And let's just zoom into these corners, and I'm just gonna kind of cut these corners back a little bit. Like that, same thing, there we go. And let's cut the top corners too. And now we're getting closer to something that actually looks like a Game Boy. But even this is somewhat detailed. If we were to select this, down in the lower left here, we have our little properties here. And our selection is 53 pixels high. And so this only fit in like a 64 by 64 sprite. So if we want a character in our game to be playing a Game Boy, let's say, we would have to make the game just a huge resolution to be able to do that, to have all these details. We didn't even add all the details that we wanted to, right? I mean, we should really have kind of a line around the edge, and then we have the darker lines around here, and then there's A and B there. And so, I mean, to make this, to actually put an A or a B there, we'd have to size this to where it's like, okay, can I write an A? Okay, there's an A. And then we'd have to make the circle around that, you know? And so we'd start with the circle, and then we could fill that in. And that's just the A button. But, you know, if we were going to scale that right, I mean, this thing is going to be huge, 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 huge. So the scale that you pick is going to be based on the smallest detail that you want to put in there if you want to actually put all the detail in. And even then, I mean, we could go crazy here because this A isn't just an A that's written on the button, but it's in relief, which means that it's like it's cut out of the button. And so we should really have like a highlight here to where we can see that ridge. So there should really be like 3 pixels across here. And so it's just like, where do you stop? And when I was new to pixel art, I was just completely stuck in this point where I didn't know where to stop with the details. And if I wanted something to be really great pixel art, I thought that it had to be really high resolution and really detailed. But that's not how pixel art works. That's the beauty of pixel art actually, is it doesn't have to be high resolution and high detailed. It just needs to be expressive. And what that means is that somebody needs to look at this art and say, oh, this is a Game Boy, you know, or that's a chair, or whatever we're trying to make, which right now, even at 53 pixels high, this is obviously a Game Boy, right? There's no question that that's what this is. And guess what? The sizing isn't perfect. Nothing is perfect about this, but I mean, this is without a doubt a Game Boy. We don't have to have really anything super detailed about this. I mean, we're missing so much stuff. We're missing the Game Boy Color logo. We're missing the power button. We're missing the ridges on the sides. We're missing the arrows on the D-pad. We're missing the start and select things. But dang, I mean, look at that. I mean, 10 out of 10 times, somebody would look at this and say, hey, that is a Game Boy, probably a Game Boy Color. But check this out. This is what's going to blow your mind, okay? It would seem that this is about as low resolution as we can get. But check this out. Let's do this in a 16 by 16 space instead. I'm just going to draw a square here, and I'm going to look down here on the left to see how big I'm making this. So 15. So look at how much lower resolution 16 by 16 is. Let's try that. Okay, so let's just make this the right size, something like this probably. I'm just going to get rid of this here. Can we make this look like a Game Boy? Let's try. Just fill that in. And at this point, we're going to be throwing away major detail. So the question is, what makes this Game Boy look like a Game Boy? Well, we have the screen. So I'll do this with a filled rectangle, something like that. We have the buttons. I'll hit B to switch back to just my normal brush here. There's the buttons. We have the D-pad. There we go. We have the start and select buttons, something like that. We have the rounded edges. There we go. Now, is somebody going to look at that and say that's a Game Boy? Maybe not quite yet. Maybe we need to put this little thing in here. Here we go. Again, probably 9 or 10 times out of 10, somebody will look at that and say that is a Game Boy Color. That's probably what that is. And look at all the detail that's gone. There is so much stuff missing here, but we have the main things that express that this is a Game Boy Color. Can we do this at a smaller resolution? Okay, can we do this at 8 by 8? Oh goodness. Let's try it. Filled rectangle, just looking down here, this is 8 high. Let's do something like that. And let's do the screen. And then we have the D-pad and the buttons. We might have to get a little bit, and this is where stuff is starting to get like, I don't know if we can quite put in that much detail, right? But check this out. Because this is expressive and not exact, we can do some fudgery here. So maybe we still have the rounded corners. Maybe we don't worry about the inside screen here. Maybe we make these buttons just a little bit of a different color like this so that we can make them closer to the screen. Maybe we do something like that. And depending on the context, I mean, if this is sitting on somebody's bed, you might look at that and you might say, oh, that's a little Game Boy. And if everything else is really low resolution like this, that might be totally reasonable. Now, we've been trying to keep things sort of a believable size and shape and everything, but we might even be able to do something like if we decide this D-pad is really important, we could do a plus like this. Maybe we could even make this a little wider, and then we'll have a couple buttons like this. And it's possible that that might read better as a Game Boy, even though it's just really low resolution, because maybe we even throw away one of these buttons like this. Maybe that reads better. Again, it's not exact, it's expressive. And so you don't have to put in all the details. You don't have to have things the right size or scale. It just has to feel and be recognizable as the thing that you're trying to make. And so this might be a perfectly valid Game Boy Color for your very low resolution 8x8 tile game. Now, is this one better? Obviously. Obviously it makes more sense. And this one's even better than that. And of course, a photo is better than that. But we're not necessarily going for better all the time. We're going for expressive, right? So that's the major thing that you need to let go of starting with pixel art is you're not going to put in all the detail. You're going to put in the important features of whatever you're trying to make so that it reads. And when I say reads, I mean somebody looks at it and they recognize what it is and they believe it, okay? So that's what we're going to be asking all the time is, does this read as a Game Boy Color? Yes. Does this one? Yes. Does this one? It's maybe getting a little bit, not really sure, but probably. And so if we're trying to pick a resolution and we know we're going to be drawing things like this Game Boy Color, a 16x16 sprite might be about right. That's why I like to work 16x16 is you can put quite a bit of detail in without it being overwhelming. This kind of thing, you're going to really have to understand how pixel art works to draw something bigger like this and have it and just not be lost. But 16x16, very manageable. So we're mostly going to be working at that resolution just because it's a nice balance between the amount of detail you can put in and, keeping things reasonable. But yeah, if you only remember one thing from these last couple lessons, it's that pixel art is expressive and you don't have to put in all the details. All right? All right. So let's get into something while we make our next concept here. I'm just going to make a new file and let's do this 32 by 32 just so we have some room, and I'll hit OK and zoom in here. I'll open our Arnie 16 palette and I'll bring up a reference here. We're going to make a little couch. It's always a good idea to use reference when you're drawing something because you might think you know what something looks like, but you'll kind of miss a lot of the details that make something look like the something that it is. By the way, this little utility is called Pure Ref. It's not part of Sprite. I'll put a link in the comments or the description down below. And let's just take one corner of this. This is going to be a 16x16 square. And let's think about drawing this. So in art, if you're going to make something that looks like it has shape and definition like this, that looks like an actual 3D object, even if you're drawing in 2D, the thing that gives it that shape is the shading. So that's the difference between how light hits the top faces of this object versus the sides and the front. And you'll notice here that it's darker on the front and it's lighter on the top. It has this little highlight here. And so if we were going to make something like this, all we have to do is make shapes that are roughly the same shape as each of these faces and have a difference in brightness, just like these faces have a difference in brightness. So we don't have to be perfect. We can just start out like this and just kind of give it a try. We can always change things around. We can always play with it. And remember, pixel art is expressive. So this doesn't have to be exactly the right size and shape. It just has to feel the same. So this definitely feels like that front face, and it's a good color to start out with. Now, in pixel art, there's a couple different perspectives you can draw something in. I mean, I guess you can draw in a ton of different perspectives, but you generally see either a top-down perspective or a side view perspective, especially when you're working with games. So top-down pixel art would be something like this. It's not directly from the top, but it's almost like you're viewing it from the front and looking down at it, right? So you see the front faces of things and the top faces of things. Then there's also side view, which is, like Mario, that kind of thing. And depending on how that's drawn, you might just see the front face of things or the side face of things. You'd see one side of them, right? So here's a good example. It's just coming at it sideways. You can also draw something from the side view that has one side and the other side, but not the top. So this is the front face and the side face, but we don't see the top, right? We're just looking at this from the side. So you can really kind of decide what you want. This picture is sort of a mix. We can see three sides. And while you can do this in pixel art, it's a lot easier to stick with one or two sides. My favorite way to draw is the top-down view, where we see the front side as well as the top. And so let's say we're looking at the front side here, and now we need the top. And let's go ahead and add an outline. I'm just gonna grab a black and let's put an outline around this, and we're gonna change this in a little bit, but this is a good start. All right, so that's this front face. Now we need the top. So I can hold down Alt and click on this red to color pick it. And if we were just drawing this from the front, we could just fill this in like this, and we'd have something like that. And this would be the front view of our couch. Now, it's kind of boring. That's why I like the top-down view. So I'll just hit Control Z a couple times. We're gonna draw this top face here. So let's just kind of fill this in. Let's just say that's the top. Again, we can change this around later. We're gonna have the tops of our arms. Then we'll have the back of the couch. This will make a little bit more sense here in a second. And we'll also have the top of the couch. So let's just grab our selection marquee and we'll just bring this down a little bit. Always okay to move things around. Go back to my pencil. And we're gonna have the top face here too. Boy, again, we're just starting with something and then we're going to play with it. So far this doesn't really read. Nobody really knows what this is. So what we're gonna have to do is pick a color for the top faces here, which is gonna be this color, but a little bit lighter. And I'm also gonna make it a little warmer. So what that means is a little bit more towards yellow. So in our color picker, these colors kind of wrap around, right? So this color and this color aren't actually that far away from each other because it kind of wraps around, it kind of loops. So if I were to pick this here, it's gonna be really similar. And I'm gonna make it lighter, which goes up, and then a little bit warmer, which goes to the right. And now we have this kind of light tomato color that we can fill in. And now if we look at our preview here, it sort of works. If you look at that, it sort of works. If somebody said, does this look like a couch? You'd be like, yeah, that looks like a couch. It looks like a chair that you could sit in, you know? Maybe it's not wide enough to be a couch, which we can change that. But now that we have something here on the canvas, we can play around with it, which is really exciting. But the thing that really makes this read, even though this isn't the greatest, and there's a bunch of stuff I would change, the thing that makes this read, that makes us understand this form is the difference in the shading between the faces, right? We have the brighter faces on top and we have the darker faces on the side. And then we know that there's some kind of form there. Now, let's make this a little better. One thing that'll make this read a little nicer is if we don't have this really dark black in the interior of the shape. I like to outline things in black, and sometimes even just a darker version of the main color. But the inside strokes we don't want to be so dark just because there isn't as big of a contrast between the different parts of this object itself and the rest of the world, okay? So let's go ahead and color pick our red here. And this time we're gonna make it darker and we're gonna make it a little bit cooler. And let's make this pretty dark, but not black. Yeah, something like that. So we'll just fill this in like this, and this will automatically just start to feel a little nicer. Yeah. See how that feels just a lot more rich now? Oh, that's so nice. The other thing is I don't feel like we're getting this curve shape very well. It looks flat up here. So again, we can always change stuff, right? So let's just go ahead and erase some of this, maybe bring it down like that. Let's see how that works. Does that work? Yeah, that works great. So now it just feels curved at the top. If we want this a little bit wider, we can select these different parts and just move them over with the arrows on the keyboard, this. And then here's a trick. You can select this and then just stretch it to kind of fill that in. There we go. And now this is definitely looking like a couch. That's looking nice. Now, a couple other things that are just gonna make this really nice. One is we have this little highlight here on the edges. That would be nice to build that into our pixel art. And so let's grab this kind of light tomato color and let's make an even lighter version of that. And I'm not gonna make that super warm, but maybe just bring it up a little bit. Let's see how that looks. And now we have something that's a little bit lighter than the top face and definitely lighter than the side face. Let's just throw that in there on any edge that's kind of in between. There we go. See, oh, now look at it. Look at it now. That really is starting to work. Oh, that's beautiful. And depending on how shiny we want this to be, that just depends on how bright we make this, right? We could just make this a little bit brighter. I can hit G to go into paint bucket fill mode like this and just make it just a little brighter than it was. And now it's a little bit less shiny. right? And that's really starting to look good. Now, I do like the darkness here when things come together, especially like look here in our example, there's a really dark line there. And so that's realistic. That makes sense to have that dark line there. But don't be afraid to experiment. You know, it might even be better to put a bright edge on the sides like this, and that might read a little better as being kind of the top of these arms, right? That's looking pretty good. Now let's talk about this outline. Again, I like a big, nice contrasty outline. You don't have to have that. But one thing that helps this a little bit is if you have faces that are sideways like this, they're darker than, you know, the top faces, but you can also kind of hint at that by changing your outline. This is something I learned from a guy named Pixel Pete. He has a lot of really great tutorials on pixel art. Guy's a genius. Make sure to check him out. But yeah, I'm just going to eyedropper this dark red, and I'm going to make an even darker red. Something that's almost black, but not quite. Okay. And here where I would outline this top face, I'm just going to turn that outline, that kind of dark wine color. Same thing here on the top. And that's going to kind of just hint at this too. Now this might just be not dark enough. Maybe we'll just use this exact color and see if it reads. Just see if it works. We can always change it. That's the nice thing. Yeah, see, that feels pretty good. That feels pretty good. And it might even feel better if we don't use exact black here, but we use almost black, but very dark maroon. It just makes it feel nice and rich. Oh, look at that. See, I love pixel art because that just makes this feel so good. See, I love pixel art because it just doesn't take very much time to make something look a lot better. Look at that. Oh, that looks so much better. Now this is a really, really solid pixel art rendering of this couch. And all we did was just start with something and just kept going over and over and over it. And even if you're lost by this point, here are the principles, right? If we were going to draw just a box, you might do something like start with the outline of a box, the front face, right? And then we're going to draw the top face, which is going to be up here, right? So we have the front and the top of the box, and I'll use these same colors. Let's take the front face and make it that red. And the top face is going to be that same color, but brighter and generally a little bit warmer. And this edge right here, you can either keep with a harsh line if you want to, but I like making a little highlight here. That just makes it feel really realistic. And then you can adjust the proportions, right? If it doesn't quite feel right, you can select these, maybe move this down. Yeah, that looks more like a cube. And then again, I like to use the outlines to help inform the shape a little bit. And now that really looks like a box sitting there. And so if you're brand new to pixel art, you're just getting into this, draw some boxes, man, because that's going to help you understand how this works and also get you a little bit more used to Sprite and drawing in pixel art. There we go. Yeah, there's our little box. And what's cool is once you have a box, you can make so much stuff out of it, right? So it's like, let's make this a little locker, right? So we have a little handle here, make this a suitcase, right? Make a little latch thing here. Again, we'll make it a little bit brighter on top like that. And we have a little latch on there. Isn't that cool? But those are the main principles of drawing almost anything in pixel art. Is it's all about shading, getting that color of that front face and the top face and the little highlights and using those outlines to help that shape read as clearly as possible. Now let's talk a little bit more detailed about using color. Just going to zoom in here and let's just draw a box again. Just kind of draw it random size here. Okay. And let's make this kind of this bluish teal color. I'll just hit G and fill this in. And so this, I guess you could call like the main material color of this box. And I think it's pretty helpful to start with your main material color like this, and then pick your shades and everything from there. So I'm just going to put a little bit of color here. We're going to make kind of some swatches. And usually after your main color, you're going to need probably a lighter color and a darker color. And what's tempting is just to take this exact same color and just turn up the brightness and turn up the darkness, right? So if I click on this color swatch down here, this will give us some RGB sliders. And if I go over here to HSV or HSL, I have a hue slider, which is just the actual color, the saturation, which is how intense the color is, and then the luminance, which is how bright the color is. And so if I were to take this luminance slider and just bring this up a bit, you'll see this is going straight up on this color mixer. I could fill in this lighter color and that looks nice. If I hit G, I can put this in and that looks totally reasonable, right? I'll hit Alt and pick this color again and click back to our HSL, and I can bring this down a little bit, make it a little bit darker. And now I have a darker version of this same color. And again, that looks pretty nice too. Let's say I want an even brighter version of this. We can go to HSL, bring this up even more. And it's nice right here, we have this kind of comparison of the color that we had and the color that we're making. And so we can bring this up a good amount so that we know we have a bright enough color. That's nice. Pick the lower color here. let's make this almost black, like just really close. So now we have 5 different shades of this same color. And so we can use this. I can just pick this for our little highlight on our face. I take this darker color and do the top outline like that. And that looks pretty good. I mean, that's a nice looking box. But I want to show you a really cool trick to make this a little bit more rich, just look a little bit nicer. Let's grab this whole thing and I'll just Control C and Control V, and I'll just move this out. Let's just line this up with the edges a little bit. And you know what? Let's also put this on a consistent background. I'm gonna go over to our layers, right click on layer 1 and say new layer. You can also hit Shift N, and I'm gonna take this layer. What you do is you select it and then you grab kind of the edge of it, and that'll let you move the layer around. I'll bring that down below. Double click on this and call this BG for background, enter. And let's put this on a background that's reasonable. We'll just put this all on a gray background so that we have a consistent background here. We aren't tricking ourselves or anything comparing these two pieces of art. I'll go back to layer 1 where we have our actual art. And now I'm gonna restart with our original art here and just go back to our base color. And this time, when I make the brighter versions of this color, I'm not just going to make them brighter, but I'm actually going to make it a little bit warmer when it's brighter and a little bit cooler when it's darker. And you can do this with any color. Depending on the color, it can be a little bit tricky or unintuitive, but check this out. So I have my original color, and what I'll do is I'll go up a little bit and I'll go a little bit towards the warmer side of things. So it's up and then to the left a little. And now I'll hit G. And it's a subtle difference depending on how crazy you get. I could move this over a little more, but I'm tinting these highlights a little bit warmer. I'll take this and then again, bring it up a lot and then bring it to the right, bring it to the left. It might be just a little saturated, so I'll kind of take the saturation down with this slider here. And maybe I'll just bring it up a little bit, something like that. And so these are getting tinted a little bit warmer as we get brighter. Down here, we're going to take it down and then to the right a little bit and more towards this kind of solid blue, G, and then I'm going to move this really into that blue at the bottom. So now we have our base color, but as it gets darker, it not only gets darker, but it also gets a little bit more blue, more on the cold side of things. And while this palette feels similar, just take this, copy and paste it and put it next to our other palette. While it feels similar, the colors here are a little bit more interesting. It just gives it a little bit more character. And so now if we colorize our box with these colors, the difference between these boxes is pretty subtle, but this one just feels a little bit more poppy and a little bit more interesting. Where this one feels good, but it feels like it's like missing something. It's missing a certain richness. And so it's that subtle difference between tinting those highlights just a little bit, tinting those shadows a little bit, just so these colors span this range just a little more than going directly up and down. And this one little trick is going to make your pixel art just stand out just a little bit more. Okay, we can use the same thing for making something like a rock. All right, so let's start with maybe a gray. Here, let's make a rock. I'm just going to kind of draw a little oval thing, and we'll fill this in with, let's just do kind of a darker gray. And there's kind of the base color for our rock. And even a rock that's gray, right? We can take the saturation up a little bit and we can make the brighter parts a little bit on the warm side. So I'll just kind of grab this yellow, desaturate it a little bit. And we could make something that's a little bit brighter here. So I'll just make part of this kind of this brighter yellow. And then we can take this down a little bit and bring it into sort of the blue range. And that's a much more interesting rock than if this were just, you know, a brighter gray and a darker gray. So there's the difference. One looks, you know, kind of plain. The other one looks more interesting. I even find that with grays, it's kind of fun to make them not so gray, but to make them a little bit blue and just kind of tint even like your base color, tint that a little bit. And if this is tinted a little blue, we can actually have the highlight maybe even just a little bit less blue, a little bit more towards the warmer side of things. And that looks really nice too. So you don't have to have things exactly gray, and your highlights and shadows, I would say, you know, 80% of the time, they look better when you tint them like this. I'd also recommend these outlines that you use a really dark version of the main color, you know, tinted maybe a little bit cooler for the outlines, because when you zoom out, I might even go just a little darker than this. Yeah, it still looks basically like a black outline, but again, it just feels a little bit more interesting, feels a little bit more rich, and also kind of feels more natural. Like this black, I mean, it looks good. It looks good, but this dark blue looks nicer on it. looks more natural, and we still get that strong outline feel. So if you want to make your art a little bit more rich, this is a nice trick. You'll probably hear this called hue shifting or tinting, but it's just taking those highlights, making them a little bit warmer, taking the shadows and making them a little bit cooler. It's an easy trick, and I highly recommend you do it. Now let's talk about one of my favorite things about pixel art, and that is detail, or maybe kind of the lack of detail. What's so cool about pixel art is you don't need to get super detailed, and your mind kind of fills in the blanks. We could think about this like a Bob Ross painting. Like, look at this, it looks beautiful. But the thing is, there actually isn't tons and tons of detail here. Like if you zoom into this, he hasn't actually put the wood grain on any of the boards. Some of the way the trees are painted, it doesn't even really make sense. This path is just like a bunch of blotches, and yet, when you look at it from a little bit further back, man, it is just really impressive. And this is sort of how pixel art works. Our mind will fill in all of the details, and even though we don't put every single little thing in there, our mind kind of makes up for it. And look at this is just beautiful. And all this really is him scraping the palette knife down and then kind of feathering it out with the brush. And it looks like a photo of mountains. Crazy. Looks like he spent all this time painting tons and tons of trees back here. But it's kind of like an optical illusion. And that's the kind of thing that we're building with pixel art. And because pixel art has really similar principles, we can even kind of paint like Bob Ross inside of Aseprite and make some Bob Ross pixel art. And we're going to do that in just a couple minutes in this lesson. One of my favorite things to draw in pixel art is wood grain. And so let's say we were going to make like a hardwood floor. Let's just start out with a nice brown like this. I'll just zoom in. We'll maybe do just part of this. Let's take this kind of darker part. We'll just count down a few pixels. I'll hit B to go to our brush. We'll just draw a line all the way across. We'll do a similar thing down here. And so we're making kind of these big boards. I'm just going to go ahead and split those, something like that, and then just offset those splits. Doesn't have to be perfect. That's the thing with the hardwood floor. Doesn't have to be exactly right. In fact, it's a little bit more interesting if it's not. And now if we look at this, it's kind of boring, but we can start adding some details, and this is where it's really going to be really cool. When you think about wood grain for something, let's just say this is zoomed in. You can draw the wood grains like this, you can have like a little knot in the wood, this kind of thing. And if you're doing higher resolution pixel art, that's not a bad way to do it. But even with really low resolution, we can kind of, as Bob Ross would say, add some indications of this wood grain. And so I'm going to start just by picking this main color, and let's make a little bit lighter color. I'll just push this up and to the right, just a touch, maybe not quite that much. And if we take the upper part of this board and highlight it like that, we get a little bit of definition to the boards. It looks like the light is coming from way back here somewhere. That's a nice start. And what we're really doing so far is we're kind of just shading this. We can look down here on our little preview, see how that looks. That's looking good. Now let's maybe take a cooler color, just take this down a little bit, make it a little bit more red, which kind of goes around this and sort of towards blue. And let's shade this a little bit, just like this, adding a little bit of dark on the other side. And depending on how much detail you put in here, that kind of informs the mind about the texture. Right now, if we were to look at this, these look like sort of rounded boards that are really smooth. But from here, even though we have 3 lines to play with, we don't have all this resolution for each of these boards, we can do some tricks that inform the mind on what kind of material these boards are made out of. Right now, it's a little bit hard to tell. Let's say we want to make this really shiny. We could grab more of a highlight here. We could do something like add some highlights to these. And again, these don't have to be perfect. And now we have these more kind of shiny boards. But here's where it gets pretty magical. I can take this base color and I can kind of break up this shading a little bit. And I'm just going to kind of click randomly around here and just kind of fill this in a little bit. And now this looks more like kind of weathered boards. Looks like they're much older. And really, we're just barely doing anything. And look at the difference that this has made down in the preview. Let's make this even a little better. Maybe this is just a little bit too spotty. I'll add a few more back in here. We just add a couple breaks here and there. Keep it tasteful. There we go. Maybe like 1 break per board. But just like we were shading the outlines of our couch and our rock, we can play with these outlines too. So maybe I'll saturate this a little more. And I'm just going to pick sort of a darker brown, hit G, and then fill that in. That already looks nicer, a little bit more rich. Let's take even a darker part, and I'm just going to fill in, I'm just going to put a dot where these lines intersect, like this. And that's going to make this just have a little bit more depth, a little bit of shading here, because where all of these boards meet, there's just a little crack. And again, almost no detail I'm adding, just adding a little bit of dots. In fact, let's make this just a little bit darker so it's easier to see. One thing you can do if you want to change like all of the same color is you can go over here to your marquee tool and click on it and select this magic wand. And as long as you don't have contiguous selected, you can click on any color and it will select everything that's that color. And from there, you grab something like the fill tool and uncheck contiguous there, and you can change that entire color. In fact, I don't even think you need to select anything to do that. If you just uncheck contiguous with the fill tool, you can change all the colors on your canvas, which that is very, very helpful. Just make sure that you recheck that because it'll get you in trouble. Okay, switching back to my pencil tool. Now we're getting some really cool texture here on our wood floor. And depending on how much lighting and everything we want on this might be exactly what we want. But let me show you kind of a different way to do it. I'm just going to use our same trick here, the uncontiguous fill tool, and I'll just fill in all of these colors so that we're kind of back to our original brown. Let's take this, make this a little bit darker like this. And this time, instead of coming at it from a highlight and a shadow, we can just add some kind of fake wood grain here. And so we'll just add a couple of dots and then sort of fade them out like this. And you just add a little bit. There we go. Just adding a little bit of interesting stuff here. You can kind of just make it up. If you don't like it, you can always erase it. It's no big deal. You can make all the boards different, or you can copy the boards if you want to tile this or whatever you want to do. So now we've just filled in the sides of our boards. And in context, if we look at this in the game, if this is on the floor, that looks like a wooden floor. We can even accentuate this a little bit by adding a little bit more shading kind of randomly, just adding a little bit to these little cracks, making them irregular. And that makes that seem a little bit more dilapidated. Feels good. We can even do stuff like add a little bit more on the sides. The only thing you got to do is be careful about making this too speckly, or else it'll kind of just look noisy and you'll sort of lose the detail. But yeah, that's starting to look like a really old, nasty looking wooden floor. If you feel like this kind of effect is too much, just take this color and you can actually just take this base color. I'm just going to sample this base color, go back to our paint bucket tool, make sure contiguous is off, but this time, this slider down here, this is like the opacity of your brush. And you can take this down like halfway. And if you're using the pencil tool, it's only going to draw this at half strength. And if you have the fill tool, it's only going to fill it at half strength. And so if I just click on this, then it effectively kind of lightens those colors. And now we're getting a little bit better effect here. It's a little bit more subtle. And depending on how subtle we want this to be, end up looking a little bit nicer. I tend to like things that are just a little more subtle like that. And whatever color you have, you can kind of preview what it looks like over the other colors, even at half strength. So like we could even mix in some dark blue, very little opacity, and we can kind of mix things around a little bit. So that's the cool thing, is you can add this detail without getting super detailed, and your mind sort of fills that in. And this kind of technique works for rocks and bricks and any kind of texture. I mean, really anything. If you want to learn a little bit more about how to fake texture, I definitely recommend checking out some Bob Ross videos because it's pretty crazy, the things you can do. Let's do one more kind of example of this. In fact, let's even go crazy. Let's do like a Bob Ross sort of painting here. Let's start with some blue for some sky. Bring up my Arnie 16 palette. Let's get some white. And let me show you a cool way to draw some clouds. We can increase the size of our brush by holding Control and rolling with our scroll wheel. And the more we roll up, the bigger our brush size will be. And so you can make like circles and stuff like this really easily. So I'm just gonna make a couple of circles here in the sky, and then I'll pick the sky color and we'll just cut these off like this on the bottom. So we have flat clouds on the bottom. There we go, there's some clouds. And let's add a little bit of shading to the clouds. Let's pick this sky color, maybe bring it down just a little bit, and then take the opacity down a lot, like that. Maybe just a little, something like that. Let's go back to our magic wand. I can click this, and that's gonna select everything that's white. Then I can go back to my pencil tool, and it'll only let me color inside of this selection. So that's a great way to make a quick selection and make some changes to whatever color you have selected. So I'll just make a bigger brush here. I'm just gonna kind of fill in the bottom part of these clouds like this, something like that. There we go. And I find I'm always picking the color and kind of going way too far and then picking the color I want, kind of cutting back on it. That's okay to do that. Yeah, so something like that. That looks nice. I'll hit Control D to deselect. There we have our clouds. And if you want to, you can break this up into layers if you want to. I don't mind just drawing on one layer because again, it's so easy to select the different colors. Let's make some mountains, right? I'm gonna pick kind of this blue, maybe just make it a little bit lighter. One trick you can do if you want a color between what you have and what you want is you can just take the opacity down and click on the background like this, and then hold Alt and color pick it, and you can get that color without the opacity. So full opacity, that's what that color is, the result between this light blue and then what we had, the dark blue. And now I have this totally opaque color that I can draw on stuff. So yeah, let's make some mountains here. I'll just make kind of this part, and then I'll just draw a big mountain like this, and maybe another one like this, maybe a little one in the background. We'll just fill this in. Just takes a second. Let's get our preview here so we can see what's going on. Okay, and we'll just start with something like that. Now for these mountains, let's put a little bit of shading on the mountains. I'm going to take just a darker and bluer color. Let me show you a trick. You can take the top of these mountains and just drag down and kind of do a squiggly line like this. Same thing here, squiggly line, and then you just pick one side or the other to, so let's just pick the left side. So I'll hit G, make sure that I have contiguous off, make sure I have contiguous on. I can select this part, go back to B, and I do want to keep that highlight there and these highlights here, but I can hit G to fill in this part. And now we have the brighter parts of the mountains in the background with the clouds behind them. Let's make a mountain that's a little bit darker and that's a little bit closer to us. Do the same thing, just kind of add a little mountain like this. Maybe make it a little bit taller. Yeah, something like that. G. And I'll do the same thing. I'll take a little bit darker, a little bit bluer, and squiggly. Let's just make this a little bit more to the left. There we go. And then you can take little patches on one side of the mountain and just kind of add a little bit like this. Same thing here for these mountains in the back. Again, you just add a little bit of the bright and the dark and the dark and the bright. And even though we're just kind of randomly clicking around, if you look down here in the preview, magic is happening and your mind fills it in and you're like, oh yeah, that's obviously mountains with little parts that are kind of sticking out and the sun's hitting them. It's just ridiculous how little work you can do, and it looks pretty good. All right, let's do some more Bob Rossi stuff here. Let's make some land around here, and let's maybe take some kind of brown, maybe some kind of greenish, something like that. Yeah, I'll just get a little bigger brush, and let's just put some land around here like this. Take a little bit of the stuff in the background. We'll just kind of fill this in, making this a really subtle kind of circle. I don't want a lot of little sharp places there. That works just fine. Let's say this is going to be our water, and we're going to reflect this mountain. What we can do is just take the top of this mountain. We'll just go all the way down, lined up with it. That's the nice thing about pixel art is you can line things up perfectly. And I'm just going to select this lighter color and just kind of make something that's sort of like the mountain here. Now we could just select this and actually like flip it and put it down, but we probably don't need to even get that crazy about it. We'll just do something like that. And now we have this kind of reflection. And let's take this lighter color, blend it down a lot. And again, we'll have a little bit of brighter color on this side, a little bit of darker things here, lighter things here. See, now we have this reflection. That looks awesome. We didn't have to do anything. It looks awesome. This green part looks a little flat, so let's add some shading to that. Again, I'm just going to make it a little bit darker, a little bit bluer. That's going to add some magical shading. And let's select just the green and go back to my brush, and we'll just kind of add a little bit of that shading here. Maybe there's a little bit of shading on this side so the sun doesn't come quite all the way over. Works good. And we'll just kind of break this up a little bit, just adding a little bit more kind of spots and stuff. Yeah, and now it looks like this is like a grassy hill and there's some sun coming off it like that. Let's add a little bit of land here in the foreground. If you're drawing a landscape, anything that's closer to the camera generally gets a little bit darker. So you'll notice far away we have this bright blue sky. The far away mountains are brighter blue. The closer mountain is darker blue. This land is sort of this dark green. So I'm going to take this dark green and again, take it down and a little bit more blue. And this will be our foreground land here. And again, I'm just going to take a big brush, just holding control and rolling up. And I'll just kind of do this sort of thing. Just have a little bit of land in front. That's going to work just fine. Okay. And now we're going to do some happy little trees. I'm going to start by just using a line tool. So over here, almost towards the bottom, you have a line tool, and you can click and drag and make a line. And what's nice is you can adjust that line as you click and drag. But I'm just going to pick a point up here randomly, wherever I want, probably starting somewhere where there isn't a lot going on, maybe something like this. And I'll just drag down like this. Take another one, maybe something like here, drag this down. We have a couple of trees, do one more over here. It's always nice if you don't know what to do or how many things to draw odd numbers. So 1, 2, 3 trees, that works. I'll take the same line tool and I'm just gonna draw lines here, kind of from the top of the tree and down a little bit. And I'm just making them bigger towards the bottom of the tree, like this. Here we go. Smaller at the top of the tree, or bigger at the bottom of the tree, like this. If it gets too speckly, you can kind of fill that stuff in. Don't fill them all in, put a little bit. Same thing here. We'll just do something like that. If we don't like it, we can always take it back a little bit. Again, this might be something where you'd want to make another layer so that you don't destroy what's behind it, but that's okay. You can always kind of add stuff back in. That's the nice thing is there's only so many pixels in pixel art, and you just can't get too far down the road to where you can't add detail back in. So it's okay. Just kind of round out these trees a little more, maybe make these a little bit thicker. Okay. And again, we want to shade these trees a little more. So I'll just select this and let's actually make some highlights on this. Make those like a little bit brighter actually. And since the light is coming from the right, I'm just going to use my brush and just kind of fill in some of the stuff here. It's sort of on the right of the tree, just kind of randomly on the right like this on each of these trees. And then also maybe take this and just kind of darken it down a little bit, maybe a little bit more blue, a little darker, but not quite as dark as our dark background. And I want to get some of that and just kind of break this up a little bit. I'm not going to fill in everything, but I just want it to have a little bit of texture like that. There we go. And now looking at this close up, you're like, what is that even? But from far away, it's magic, man. It looks like magic. Isn't that so cool? So our eyes fill in these details, especially when we get farther away. And you can make some really cool stuff with pixel art. It's pretty neat. So there's a little Bob Ross painting here, 32 by 32 pixels. Isn't that crazy? That's the magic. Our brains fill in the detail and we don't have to get super crazy. We can put indications and make some really cool pixel art. All right, in this chapter, we're going to be talking about color palettes. Now, we have been using a color palette inside of Sprite called the ARNE16, and there are so many different color palettes to use. And the color palette is more than just a quick way to get colors. I mean, because we could load this palette, and there's all these different colors we could use. And a lot of the time throughout this course, we've just kind of been mixing our own colors, you know, tinting and shading things. But it's not a bad idea to actually stick to just the colors in a palette. It can help stylize your work and also help you learn a lot and make good decisions here. So let's go ahead and just start with the ARNE16 palette, and then we're going to kind of go past that a little bit. But first, let's draw a little bit of art. I think it's fun to draw a computer desk because, you know, I'm sitting at one right now. I have some good reference. You can really use your imagination to put different things on the desk and everything. So I think it's a really fun exercise. I'm going to start with a rectangle. Just go over to the rectangle tool. You can also hit U on the keyboard. And this is going to be the top face of our desk. And we're going to kind of draw this in a top-down fashion. And so let's just make a big desk here. This is a 32 by 32 canvas. Let's make the top face and the side face like that. And then maybe we have a desk that has the two legs like that. And then the other legs would probably be hidden behind the desk at this angle. And what I like to do when I'm drawing something out is I kind of like to mock it up. And you can do this in whatever way you want, but I like to just pick a random color. It doesn't matter, just so that I can see the difference between the desk and whatever else I'm kind of sketching out. So this is sort of like sketching with a pencil. So we'll have a sketch and like, let's make a computer monitor. Let's put that sort of toward the side. And we don't have to get this totally right. We can just put something in there like that. Let's put a little keyboard here, put a little mouse. Then we'll maybe do something fun like a desk lamp. I'll just pick another color here. So I don't know, maybe we'll have one of those lamps that kind of looks something like that. All right, I'll go to my selection here, grab this and kind of put this more in the middle. And there's our sketch. From there, we can either make a new layer or we can just kind of fill in our sketch either way. Some people like to right click and say new layer, and then you can double click on this layer and turn the opacity down. And that'll just kind of like give you like these pencil lines. And then you can sort of redraw stuff however you want. And that's fine. Let's go ahead and do that. our desk is probably going to be real similar, but that's okay. I'm just going to kind of fill this in. And one thing I'll do is just kind of round these corners, I think. You can also hold Shift and you can draw a line between the last dot you made and where you are. So that's a quick way to kind of make a line without using a line tool. So I can hold down Shift and just drag these lines like this. That looks pretty nice. Fill those in for now. So this is our desk. I'll also hit E for erase and erase the edges of that desk and kind of make those rounded. I like to have those rounded corners on most things that I draw. I feel like it just looks nicer. And let's pick a good color for the desk. Let's just pick this brown. I'll hit G. That'll be the front face. Then we can kind of mix a darker color for the front face. Select this and kind of make a brighter highlight for the edge. Maybe just a little less saturated like that. Now we have our desk here. It's looking nice. And let's work on the outline here. Take this outline and maybe make this kind of a darker brown. That works. I'll just hit G and fill that all in. That looks nice. We can make the outline a little bit even darker on the bottom here. Just filling that in. Yeah, and now we have this nice kind of rich looking desk. Again, we can fill in some detail if we want this to be kind of wood grain. We don't need to draw all the wood grain here, but I could take something like this color, turn the opacity down just a little bit, and I could kind of just draw a little bit of wood grain here, just so we get the idea that this is made out of kind of some older wood. And that just looks so great, so easy to do. We can even rough up the edges a little bit by making some of the edges a little bit darker. Yeah, looks nice. Do kind of a similar thing down here. We could take this, make it a little bit darker, maybe darker than that. Yeah, so now we have kind of this old wood grainy looking desk. And let's just keep going in layers here. Just double click on this. Brings up our layer properties way too big. I'm just going to turn this way down. Let's call this desk. Hit enter. Right click, new layer. Let's call this one monitor. And we'll just call it PC. So we're going to probably draw the whole PC on one layer. And let's just start with black. I'll hit U to make a outline here and make that a little wider than our sketch. Okay. Then we'll draw sort of the lower part of our monitor, maybe something like that. E to erase that part. Okay. I might even get rid of this part because I want a little bit more room for our keyboard. Just draw our keyboard here and our mouse. Again, we don't need to put in all the detail. We can just have indications of the detail here. So let's say, let's just have the monitor off for now. Just make this kind of a darker gray. We'll have a lighter gray for the monitor color. And let's make this keyboard just a little bit bigger like this. Maybe we want the mouse to be outlined a little more like that. And let's move this up one like this. And again, maybe we can round the edges on this monitor, make it seem a little bit less sharp. Same thing for the keyboard. And again, even though we don't have the details in here, you can pretty much guess what this is, right? We don't need to draw all the keys on the keyboard. I could even take just like a lighter color here and probably just alternate it. Maybe a little lighter than this. Alternate it. And guess what? Sort of looks like a keyboard. Might even be better to fudge this a little bit. Let's take this monitor up one and let's make this keyboard just a little bit bigger. Again, we can always play with sizes and everything, and we'll just kind of checkerboard this. And yeah, now that really looks like a keyboard. We'll just fill in this space bar because that's the biggest button on the keyboard. Hit E to erase that part. And so now we have nice looking mouse and keyboard like that. Definitely looks like a computer. Maybe we want a little bezel around the screen. Could do something like this. Maybe that's a little bit too bright. You can hit G to fill that in. Maybe just a little darker, somewhere in there. And let's take all of this and move it over. It's the nice thing about having this on a separate layer is it's easy to do that. Let's make some room for our desk lamp. Right click, new layer. We'll call this lamp. And again, we'll draw like a little base here for our lamp. We'll draw a little neck and then the lamp shade, which goes around in kind of a little kind of triangle shape like that. Okay, and let's make this green. For some reason, I like my desk lamps to be green. Just fill that in with green right now. There we go. We'll have to move this around just to make this work a little better. Let's adjust this lamp. Let's maybe make the outline a little bit darker green like this. There we go. G to fill that all in. Maybe even darker than that. Let's hit G and uncheck contiguous just to kind of fill that in a little better. Okay, great. Now, because this lamp is probably shiny, let's go ahead and make a little highlight here. Again, we don't need all the details. We can just add a couple little pings like that. Maybe a little bit of shading here on this side. There we go. Looks like a little lamp and it's off right now. Let's just move this around, see if it reads a little better. I think on the desk looks a little nicer, a little bit farther away from the mouse. Let's also work on the outlines for our computer here. Let's go back to our PC layer. We'll just fill this all in non-contiguous like that. And let's just make the front faces a little bit darker. Just kind of fudge this a little bit, just to give a little bit more indication of the lighting here. We could even add a little bit of highlight to our screen. Let's just make this a little bit lighter. Just make some lines like that. Now it looks like we have a shiny screen. Maybe even change this button, make that just a little bit different. So now we have a pretty cool little detailed desk setup. Let's get rid of our sketch here. I'm just going to delete the layer and make a new layer. Drag that and take this and drag that all the way down to the bottom. Again, I'm selecting it and then grabbing the outline to drag it. We'll call this BG. And in the background, let's do this nice kind of tealish blue. I like that. Maybe a little less saturated. Yeah, something like that. That's cool. Maybe we want the edge of this monitor to have a little shading too. Let's just maybe make that a little thicker. And take one of these brighter colors, just put that on there. So now we can kind of see the top face of that. That looks nice. Okay, so this looks great. Drawing a little desk, I think, is such a nice exercise for learning pixel art because, it's just not that serious, and you can make it up and it can look however you want. I started out talking about color palettes because this isn't really using a color palette. We mixed a bunch of different colors to make this work. But what's crazy is that we can draw this with a more limited palette, and sometimes it'll actually look nicer than having all of the freedom in the world. What I'm going to do to kind of test this out is I'm going to select all of our layers, right click and say flatten. That's going to flatten all of my layers. So this is all just on one layer here. And then I'm going to duplicate this, right click and duplicate. And we'll call this OG colors. And then we're going to have palette 1 like this. So now what we can do is we're going to draw this same kind of thing, but with a more limited palette. And let's say that we only have these colors up here. Literally, we don't get to mix our own colors. We can only use these colors. This is where you have to start making some real crazy choices. So I'll just hit G and uncheck contiguous, and we're going to start filling things in with colors. We have a couple of the darker colors that we're going to have to make choices on. And so I like this kind of darker blue. That's going to work well for a lot of the things that are kind of black. So I'll just hit G and fill that in. This will also probably work for our colors for our lamp. And maybe we want to take the slightly brighter color and use that for the kind of shading on our computer. Let's take this green and replace that green on our lamp. That works well, but we don't really have this darker green. We have a choice. We can either use a different color that's kind of a similar brightness, which might be this color right here, and that could work. Or we can use this same color and just not worry about shading it as much. And actually it looks pretty good without shading it. So I think I might go with that. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just kind of, does it look good to you? This gray looks like we could fill in for that top gray. But then again, the front gray, we don't really have something that's like that medium gray. And so we're gonna have to make a decision there. So I think maybe I'll just make everything this brighter gray. And again, we might even be able to use this brighter blue for that gray, which starts to look crazy in context. It's like it still works, And this is the point where you're going to kind of get away from reality a little more, and you're just looking to be expressive again. So now we have these kind of blue highlights, but it still works. I mean, you look at it and it still looks good, even though it's not really, it's not really what you were thinking. So same thing. Let's fill in all of these grays, make sure those are the same grays. For the brown, we have dark brown, medium brown, and light brown. We can either make the desk lighter and use the other two shades of brown. We could change the color of the desk. We can make the desk less colors. Let's see what this looks like with a really bright desk. Whew, that is sure bright, but it works. It's okay. Take this. Maybe we'll replace this color, this, and the darker shades, this. Maybe we'll just get rid of these details a little bit. Throw away some of those details, and we'll use this darker color here for the outline of the desk. The only thing that I think is left is these brighter colors, which we can use either this bright green, that totally works. We could have used this yellow, that works too. I like probably the bright green, that works well. We can even, if we want to, not use a brown for this outline. We could fill that in with this dark blue and then use this other brown for kind of the top outline. And that might work better too. It kind of depends on how it reads, how it works. Like that doesn't look too bad. This other, we are missing this here. That's not a color that we have. So maybe we have that as a bright yellow. I think that's a little bit too bright though. Maybe we just use a gray. Maybe we just don't do that one. And that's okay too. When you have a limited palette, you have to make those kind of decisions. But you can still express, hey, this is a desk with a monitor and a lamp on it. Check this out. Let's duplicate this and let's get really, really limited with our palette. For instance, the Game Boy palette, like the original Game Boy. Load this. Guess what? We have 4 colors. Can we make this expressive in 4 colors? Well, anything that's dark is going to be this dark green, pretty much guaranteed. So all the darks get the dark green. Anything that's sort of dark, we might be able to do this slightly lighter green. That's where that goes. And then 1 shade lighter, 1 shade lighter. So brightest stuff here, medium stuff like this. And we are really limiting ourselves. But guess what? Look at this. It still works. It still works. And that's pretty cool. And at this point, we might want to change things around a little bit just to have this read a little bit easier with these limited colors. So like I might want to, add a little bit of wood grain kind of towards the sides of this just to define the sides of the desk a little more. Might want to fill in the top of this desk with this kind of darker green so that we keep that little highlight that we had and kind of put that back in. When everything is kind of off colors, you really start to look at it just in brightness. And even if it doesn't quite make a lot of sense, as long as it reads, as long as you look at it and you go, oh yeah, that's a desk with a computer and it looks nice, then it works. Maybe this is just a little bit too bright again, kind of use this as sort of a highlight. And notice how it doesn't really make sense to have the brighter outline here on the back, but it doesn't confuse with the outline of this lamp. And so we're just choosing to make this brighter, and guess what? It works perfectly. Works great. Again, there aren't really a whole lot of rules. It's all about being expressive and getting across the point that you want to get across. Now, all of this is on this background. Let's put this on a bright background. Totally works. Put this on a little, maybe even a darker background like that. Ooh, that works nicely. Yeah, maybe something like that. So you can see we can start with, this is like ideal, as many colors as we want. This is as cool as we want to make it. When we limit the palette, we have to make some choices. Honestly, I kind of like this one a little better than our original one. Like there's a lot of detail here and it's exactly the colors that we would want. It's not really stylized very much. It's more just realistic. And this one adds some style and it kind of forces you to push some style into it. That isn't always a bad thing. And even same thing with the Game Boy stuff. I kind of like drawing just with these 4 colors because you have to make decisions. And it's pretty amazing how far you can get just using these 4 colors and how much your mind will fill in those details and totally accept that this has shading and form and material and all of the and texture and all of that stuff just with 4 colors. So limited palettes, not always a bad thing. I would definitely do this exercise yourself. I would draw something. If you don't know what to draw a desk. Draw your desk in front of you. See if you can draw a couple things that are on the table in front of you, and then put all those layers together if you draw with layers. Pick a palette here from our palette list and try and just use the colors in the palette, and then try and use the Game Boy colors. And if you want a real challenge, just make it black and white. Like, can you keep the same amount of detail and keep everything either white or black? Now that's quite a challenge because you might have to go over stuff and really have some weird looking stuff because you might need to make some decisions here that are kind of interesting in order to get this to still work and read as a desk with a computer on it. But it can be done. Pretty crazy, huh? So experiment with different palettes. Don't be afraid to limit your colors. In this chapter, I'm going to show you my big secret to come up with ideas for assets for your games and draw beautiful props and things like this, even if you're not that artistic. And this is also a way that you can never run out of ideas. So let's jump in here and make some art. I'm going to go to File, New. This time, let's just do 48 by 48, just a little bit bigger canvas. That's just so we have some room to move around here. And I'll pick our good old Arnie 16 palette. And just to show you that this works with anything, let's bring up a random word generator and come up with a concept for a game from that. Let's generate 3 words. Let's make them nouns. Here we go. I'll just click this a few times. Here we go. How about fishing? So we're going to make assets for our game that's about fishing. Let's say you're a guy that goes out in a fishing boat and it's like a fishing simulator or something like that. So let's just draw this on some water. Just hit G. And I'll right click on layer 1 and say new layer. We'll just lock our background layer. And we're just going to start with our first idea. a boat. Seems like you're going to need a boat to go fishing. And so I'm not worrying about much of anything here. I'm just going to grab maybe the black outline and bring up my brush and just start making a boat, something like that. And if you're making something for a game, you'd probably want to fit it into some kind of standard size. So one thing you can do is go up to View and go to Show Grid. And you can bring up your grid, and you can change the grid size by going to View, Grid, Grid Settings. And here our grid settings are 16 by 16, which I really like for game development. I think that's a really nice size. It's big enough where you can add a good amount of detail, works in most engines, and it's not so high res that it just takes forever. So 16 by 16 is great. And look at that. We like perfectly drew this boat inside of that 16 by 16. That's cool. But I'm just gonna play around and see what kind of boat I can make here. This is just a top-down view of a boat. I think maybe we'll make it a little bit bigger like this. E for erase, and we'll just erase it like that. Yeah, okay. And because this is 16 by 16, I think I might grab a marquee here and just make this a little wider so that we have plenty of room for our boat, because we'll probably want people in the boat or something. And I'll also line this up with the edges of our grid here, just so I'm kind of taking up that 16 by 16 square. Actually, I think I'll move this up a little bit because I was thinking maybe I'll add some water ripples here. Let's grab this kind of really light blue. Maybe we'll just add a couple water ripples, something like that. And then we can look at this in the preview, and yeah, kind of looks like it could be a boat there. Let's make this like a wooden boat. Make sure to check contiguous here. Add a little bit of shading here. We'll have it kind of darker towards that, so it looks like, yeah, something like that. Looks like it's floating in the water, but it doesn't really look like a boat for some reason. It kind of just looks like a floating bowl or something. So maybe what we'll do is we'll take this and move this in one. We'll make it a little pointier on this side, or maybe flatter on one side. Let's have it flat on this side, like this. Let's just kind of move this over a little bit, kind of fill this in a little bit so it's pointier on this side here and a little sharper on this side. Just take this down a little bit. See, that's looking a little better, I'd say. Maybe even take it up like that. Maybe we can keep it straight here. Let's see. No, that looks weird. That's looking a little better. Something like that. Here we have this little boat. Maybe we'll come back to this, but you know, it works as a boat. What else can we think of as a fishing game? Well, we'll probably need some kind of plants or something like floating in the water on the edge. So maybe we'll make a little bit of art for that. So maybe we'll have, I'm just going to kind of draw like big grass here, big thick grass. This, like some cattails or reeds or something, making them nice and thick. Okay, and let's add some kind of ripples around them. I'm just going to draw like little half circles kind of around these. See how that looks? It's kind of nice. And let's add a little bit of shading here. Let's make one side of these green, kind of the top sides of these things green. It's kind of nice. And do we want to outline them? Maybe we'll outline them in this kind of dark blue, something like this. Maybe let's make a rock. Let's use our rock strategy here, where we're just gonna draw a little shape and draw some shading on the side like this. It's kind of just out of the water a little bit. And we'll add some water ripples here. Yeah, that feels nice. I don't know if I like the dark black on this boat. I think I want to make that edge a little brighter. Yeah, do the shading thing here like this. Yeah, that feels a little better. It's kind of an electric orange. But yeah, something like that. Kind of an older boat. Just kind of trying to stick with this palette, so works pretty well. Maybe we'll have a little shine on this rock here. Maybe we'll even outline the rock totally like this, and then have a little darker like that. Kind of like that. I kind of like it without the outline though, honestly. So we'll see. That's the nice thing is while you're drawing, you can always make changes and stuff. You don't have to get it perfectly all the time. So now me as somebody who's like not super into fishing, I'm kind of running out of ideas here. I'm like, I assume this is on a lake of some kind. Imagine there's a boat involved. There's some grass. We could probably draw some different grass or some different rocks, but I really don't know what else to draw here. So what else would make this a little bit more rich? Feel like a more complete experience? Because the idea here is we're making a sprite sheet. Now, if you don't know what a sprite sheet is, it's a kind of a bigger piece of art that has a bunch of small pieces of art in them. So this 48 by 48 image will have 9 different sprites. That's 9 different pieces here. And the idea is that we could take this into a game engine, or even if we just want to make different art, we're kind of making an asset library. So we could take one of these 16 by 16 sprites and just kind of stamp it onto our map if we're making a game, or even just on our canvas if we're making just some different pixel art. So we're kind of creating an asset library. And we will look at this in a little bit more detail. But for now, I want to make this a really pretty fishing game with lots of nice assets, and I'm currently out of ideas at 3 assets. So what do? Well, the name of the game here is Reference. Check this out. This is the coolest hack ever for coming up with ideas for your sprite sheets. So check this out. I'm just going to type fishing on a lake from a boat. So this is the kind of game I'm thinking of making, fishing on a lake from a boat. And we bring this up. We'll instantly be shown tons of images that have to do with this feeling. And now all we have to do is just pick out things that we like that we could put into our game, right? So here we have some lily pads. That's a great idea. We have trees and the shoreline, ripples. Okay, let's just say a cozy lake. So we can also put in adjectives that kind of describe our game too. So a lot of this comes into like a cozy cabin. There's these kind of rocks stacked up on the shoreline. I like that. Oh, here's a dock. Yeah, I didn't think about a dock. A dock would be cool. Dock on a lake. Yes, see this kind of thing. I love these kind of docks. So we could make a dock. We could make some rocks. We could make ripples. We could make lily pads. Crab fishing. What about fishing gear? Oh yeah, see, so this he's sitting on the side of the lake and he has a tackle box and a bucket and that kind of thing. Oh, we could make trash in the water that you could pick up. See, like we're even coming up with ideas for our game. That's why I love this process so much, is because you can really come up with such cool stuff. So let's make some lily pads. Just gonna maybe make like a set of a couple here. Yeah, a little bit darker on this side, kind of like we did with the rocks. Those definitely look like lily pads. That's awesome. Add a little bit of highlights to them. Maybe we'll keep that, maybe we won't, but that looks pretty good. Oh, we can make a little dock. You know, I'm excited to draw wood grain, baby. Will the dock be bigger? It might be bigger. So that might actually be 2 sprites wide. So I don't know, let's draw a pole for the dock here. Maybe make it about that big. We'll have the top of it like that. And let's use this brighter color and this darker color here. One hack to make things look a little bit round is you make them bright on one side like that. Can kind of look a little bit more round. Let's make this maybe just a little bit brighter. There's kind of the top of a pole. Let's maybe use this darker blue. I like that. We'll do this same thing with our boat. We could take this and copy and paste. Control C, Control V. That's what I'm doing. Make one up top. Control V again. We'll make that here. Okay, let's just do 2. Sounds good. And let's make some boards. I'll just kind of draw the boards next to them for now. Let's make these a little bit bigger. Something like that. Control C, Control V. Hey, that worked out perfectly. Sometimes you won't always hit that perfectly. But that didn't work out perfectly, because if we repeat this, we're going to want this to tile a little better. But that's okay. We can make this side a little bigger maybe. It's not going to matter that much. And let's just color in these boards, and then we're going to kind of extend them out here in just a minute. So again, I'm just going to kind of add a little bit of wood grain here like this. There we go. Yeah, looks like kind of an old dock. And then we'll just extend these out. Just take this, kind of extend it this way. Extend this one out like this. There we go. Just kind of fudge this so that it reads a little better. Maybe make a little circly thing like that. So it's looking pretty good. I'll make the edge of this a little bit brighter. Maybe not. And kind of just play around with this dock until we get what we're looking for. And again here, this is going to be like half of our dock. So let's just make this brown all the way across like this so that it'll go together. And then watch this. I can take this whole thing, copy, Control C, Control V, bring it over here. And then we can hit Shift H, and that will flip this horizontally. So horizontal flip, and now we have this great big dock that looks really cool. And you know what? We can kind of fill in the middle of this, just like that. Let's make sure that our poles are shaded on the same side. Let's just have a little bit of shading here like that. Yeah, so now we have the dock. And so this is a great big dock that we can kind of stamp onto our game. Let's make something else, maybe something that's floating in the water, like some garbage or something, or maybe a cooler full of snacks. That's what I'm talking about. Let's get our outline here, and let's draw a cooler. This is just going to be like the top of the cooler, and it's going to be kind of halfway into the water. And so maybe we'll do something kind of like this. Make this a little smaller just so we have some room. Make it come out of the water a little bit. Add some ripples here. So we'll have the side of the cooler, which, I don't know, I always think of a red cooler for some reason, with a white top. Do this kind of whitish top like that. And it has kind of the edge to it too. So let's maybe make a little white edge like that. Yeah, kind of like that. Maybe it has a little divot here for the handle. Let's make the top of this a little bit lighter. Yeah, so that kind of looks like that's a little cooler floating. And I think I even want to not have this here at the bottom. Yeah, because then it just looks like it's floating in the water, which is really nice. Just make a little water ripple here. Yeah, so there's a little floating cooler. And yeah, that looks pretty nice. So now we have all these ideas, and we can add other things floating in the water too. We have all these ideas for our game and a nearly limitless supply of inspiration of what to draw. I mean, any of this stuff we could have floating in the water, backpack that you find on the shore. It's just limitless. And so this is a great technique to make a sprite sheet for your game. So you have all these different assets. And we're going to learn a little bit more about sprite sheets and making your own game assets. In part 2 of this course, we're going to build all kinds of props and sprite sheets and tile sets together. And if you want to make pixel art for your own games, part 2 is what's going to get you super comfortable with that. And if you're having fun here, that's going to be a blast. There's a link down below to get part 2, and I'll see you there.